I'm Geno Dorough, retired St. Louis County Police Department negotiator, and you're listening to the Crisis Cop podcast on the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Crisis Cop podcast. I'm your host, Pat Doering, and we have a special in-studio interview, which this is the first for us in our Legends field. And I'm going to introduce my mentor, I consider, and probably why I'm here today. Geno Dorough, retired from St. Louis County. Geno, thanks for being here.
That's a great pleasure, Pat.
So we'll probably get into, I don't know how much stuff we're getting into, but let's just kind of start off with just a little bit about yourself and your career.
All right. I started at St. Louis County Police Department in 1973 and did 4 years on patrol in the 1st Precinct up in North County. And then in 1978, I went into our drug unit, worked undercover narcotics for 2 years. We had 30-month time span. I left the drug unit, went into sex crimes for a couple of years. And then I went back into the precinct probably in, I believe it was 1982, and stayed there for 3 years. And then in 1985, I was selected to go into our tactical unit, our special weapons team, and went in there, and they asked me if I'd be interested in being a negotiator. Actually, my first response was no. I really wanted to be a tactical officer and be on the entry teams and do all the fun things. And they go, well, my lieutenant at that time, Mark Gartland, said, let me explain to you what a negotiator does for us. So he did. And he goes, I know your communication, ability and how you carry yourself, project your professional image. And I'd really like to give it a shot. And I said, well, okay. Because I had a lot of respect for the man. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I'm not going to turn him down because he selected me to come in the unit. And I thought, okay, I'll do that. And it was an eye opener for me. I had never had any idea what negotiations was, in law enforcement. I stayed in our special weapons unit until January of 99. So I had 15 years in there and negotiated right at 300 armed barricaded situations. I was fortunate enough, though, when I was in that unit to not only be a negotiator, but also to be a tactical team entry member, and then flew the helicopters as part of our daily duties. I learned a lot in there about dealing with individuals tactically and the communication skills needed to help resolve those barricaded situations. When I left the tactical unit beginning in 99, I went to our courthouse, St. Louis County Courthouse. I went down there and they asked me to be a court liaison officer. Still worked some security issues, but while I was a court liaison officer, I was doing a lot of training to corporations in crisis intervention and diffusing aggressive behavior for workplace violence. And I began then doing a lot of training for St. Louis County and for the FBI and workplace violence. So I stayed in that unit till my retirement in 2003. And during those early years, there in 2000 and 2001, if you remember correctly, we started CIT. And the crisis intervention teams. So I began doing the communications portion of that CIT training for the officers in the St. Louis area. And then I also took that and started doing the CIT training around most of the state of Illinois, anywhere from Chicago, Peoria, down to Marion and this Carbondale, on those areas, and central Missouri, which was great. And I think I gave that up in 2012.
Okay, so what I think something to kind of explain to the audience is you were unique in the position you were at as a negotiator because, number one, it was a full-time team, but we talk about different styles. So I always say East Coast, West Coast. East Coast, more NYPD, two separate teams, right? You have a negotiation team, you have your ESU team. St. Louis County is a little different because you were actually a tactical guy, but also a negotiator.
That's correct. And I was fortunate in that way. I mean, negotiations were fairly new. People really didn't care about negotiations. Even the guys in the tactical, they were more in tune to let's go in and get them,
Right.
and I just developed a philosophy of my own, which we really parlayed into what I thought was a really good philosophy, is about survival and preservation of life and going home to your family every night. And when the guys wanted to go in and, do tactical things, I used to stop and say, well, why do we need to do this when we can try to communicate? And we can, in law enforcement, we truly, if we take our time and believe in it, we can negotiate probably 99% of these things, as you have learned over your years.
Yeah,
So
100%.
we had a dedicated team. And well, I think one of the things that helped me and then helped spread that message to guys like you and women, in law enforcement, is that being part of the tactical team, I learned both sides,
Right.
And so because it was a dedicated unit, I worked closely with the guys who were the tactical entry members. They had respect for me and I had respect for them, and I understood their job. And, and I tried to pass the negotiator's philosophy onto them. So they had a better education of how it all worked and how we work together as a team,
Right.
to recognize, respect, reduce, and remove those barriers that are put up.
Yeah, 100%. So you get on the team. Was there anybody that you would consider that maybe was your mentor, and as far as in the world of negotiations, or somebody that kind of gave you like, hey, here's some tips or here's some stuff, or was it just kind of,
Pat, I've given that some thought, and unfortunately, no. Which it was a struggle.
Yeah.
Because nobody really cared about negotiations. Yeah. And so I just started reading some things, a lot of things in psychology. But one thing I remember being a young law enforcement officer was I'm only 5'7", so I'm not, we're not big guys.
Yeah.
And I learned quickly that you can't go out there and physically overcome everybody.
Right.
And if you do try, you're going to getting hurt or killed, or somebody else is going to get injured unnecessarily.
Right.
So, in law enforcement, when we started, and even young guys now, there are people who have that innate ability, I think, to communicate, and they have the right mindset with empathy and sympathy for the people they're dealing with, and an understanding. So had nobody really other than other veteran officers that I watched through the years on the street, just communicating properly with people. And then I had the desire to do the same. So just taking psychology stuff that I read and my own thoughts on things, kind of led me into developing my style of negotiating.
Yeah. And I think it's just huge to have, unfortunately, you didn't have that in your career, but to have somebody in your career or even on your department to look towards to help that. And like I said before, I we're trying to figure this out. I think it was like 98 or 99 when I took it was just an intro to barricade class. And that got me hooked. After I took that class, I was like, oh my gosh, I got it. What is this negotiation stuff? Right.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, you came out with your book, which is the first book I ever purchased on negotiations, your compliance surrender book. And then it just kind of went from there. And I just think that's so huge. And something I really, we try and do on the podcast is talk about, like, if you're that newer negotiator, look for somebody that hopefully that's kind of paved the way for you, and seek the knowledge, because, we have that knowledge, and that's kind of the purpose of this podcast, is passing on that knowledge to some of these newer people. So, this is how it worked for us. Maybe it can work for you, kind of a thing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say, in my mind, one of the greatest things that any veteran officer can do is pass on those and become that knowledge and become a mentor to a young officer to help guide him or her, to survive this job that we did
Right.
year after year after year, and incident after incident. And what most of these young officers need to realize is when they started into law enforcement, they are negotiators.
Right.
They don't have that title,
Right.
but they're on the street and they're constantly negotiating with people who are in some level of crisis. And that's what negotiation is all about.
Yeah.
They used to call it hostage negotiations. I said, I got tired of that term because, yeah, that's part of it. but what we really do is crisis intervention and crisis negotiations. I'm glad to see that over the years it's changed to that, and they got rid of that so-called title of hostage negotiation. It really limits uh, people in what they think they can accomplish.
Yeah, and I think it's so prevalent and just what they're being taught in the academy. Like I don't know about you, but ours was ask, tell, make. That was what we were told. You know, at first you ask them, then you tell them, then you make them. That's exactly what we were told to do. And it's just like after you get on the streets, like you said, for a while, and you do that philosophy, like that doesn't always work. And if it does, it's not going to always be fun. So I
Yeah.
think we've done such a better job of actually, hey, that doesn't work. Let's actually communicate. Let's actually have some type of communication skills. And I think that's where we've really progressed in the field of law enforcement, even back when I was there to where we are now. I think we made good strides, but I still think we're a little short in some areas.
Well, wouldn't you say, Pat, I know you think this way, but wouldn't you say that 98, 99% of the things that in law enforcement that we negotiated were people in high state of crisis,
Oh,
not
yeah.
hostage
Oh,
situations?
Yeah. Very rarely do we have the actual hostage situation.
And so I'm not up on today's philosophies like you are, but in years past, back when I was started, if it was a suicidal individual, they really didn't want to send the tactical team or a negotiator. They may say, we'll send the negotiator and then we'll see what happens. I go, no, these things can escalate, and we need to be able to have trained officers out there to handle these along with the negotiator to work hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know what it's like now, if it's still that way.
But it's actually getting to a point where agencies aren't even responding to those calls because the
Oh,
liability is so high of because they go back to the
oh,
philosophy of, well, he's in his own house, no crime's been committed. There's no one else in the house. And some agencies are just not even responding, which I don't think that's right. I like the approach of at least attempt communication with the person, right? Attempts, because a lot of it depends on how do we get this information. Did that person call us? Because if they called us, I mean, they're seeking help, right? If they reached out. Now, if it's a third party, maybe there's something different there. But yeah, that's really has changed. Like when we first used to go, our tactical team and negotiators would go out on suicide calls.
sure.
Now I'd say pretty much the norm is tactical won't go out because of liability. But I think that creates a problem, like you said, is okay, well, we send negotiators out, but what about the people surrounding the perimeter? What kind of training do they have as far as when people exit or different things? So I think we're still at this conundrum of we really don't know what to do sometimes. And unfortunately, a lot of it I think is driven by lawsuits and money. And I think that's a lot of the problems.
Yeah. I always thought one of the biggest problems, yeah, lawsuits and money, but the lack of an agency or whomever to develop a philosophy that they want to stand behind and what the real purpose is out there. Now, if they're looking to go out and really give a lot of advanced training to the officers on the street, maybe I can see that.
Right.
But I really never saw that happening. And I had been involved in situations where they would say, we were just going to send a negotiator. And I go, that's not a good idea. And we would go forward. I'd go there, talk to this suicidal armed individual and talk, talk him into getting him to come out and surrender. But then when that individual would come out, it would go south because the officers that were on containment to effect the arrest did the exact opposite of what we do as negotiators, and then it went bad.
Yeah. Yeah. They just don't have that skill set to realize, hey, this is the point where we really need to slow this down and not yell at the guy. What usually happens
Yeah.
when the guy comes out, everybody yells at him, right? Drop to your knees, drop the gun, all that stuff, right? So yeah.
And that's not negotiating.
Right. Yeah.
That's an officer that's not in control.
Right.
When you're screaming and yelling at people, you're not in control. That tells me that officer's in a crisis.
Right.
You know, they can hear you. You know, in fact, one of the things that I tried to get put into place in our tactical unit when we execute high risk drug warrants is that we didn't yell at people. It was unprofessional, in my opinion. And yelling at people just shuts them down. And all they hear is noise, and they don't hear the words that you're telling them. We got to a point, and the tactical guys I worked with back in those days, like Chief Frizz here in St. Charles County, he understood the philosophy that I was helping to develop. And we didn't allow people to yell. We'd go in there and speak in a stern voice,
Right.
no yelling, and no profanity on the ground, gentlemen. Treat them that way. They know you mean business, but screaming and yelling just shows them you're out of control.
Yeah. And I think we always talk about this in negotiations. The only thing you can control is your own emotions, right? If
Yeah.
you can't control your own emotions, you're not going to be able to control that situation.
That's right.
And it's even more and more prevalent with the use of body cams. You see all this footage out there of, I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves, like you said, is when, and I get it, sometimes emotions are out there and you lose control and you throw a couple cuss words out there, right?
Sure.
But when it's all laced with cuss words, then that to me shows you're not in control at all.
Right.
And it's, like you said, I think it's unprofessional. It looks bad. So training people to use, again, don't yell, be stern, get rid of the profanity. It's more professional. And I think you're going to get your point across better too. And at the end of the day, it's going to help our profession.
Yeah.
But I just think, unfortunately, watching these body cam videos, I just think we're stuck at that point sometimes where we're yelling and cussing and it just looks like we're out of control. And then we wonder why the media or the community is always beating our doors down. Oh, look how unprofessional we are. Well, sometimes that's what we look like.
That's what we project, And I actually, in our unit back in those days, all through 85, all the way up till I left, we would do training. I would do training to our tactical officers about when we effected the arrest or the surrender, that if I couldn't be there, they knew how to communicate. Say, hey, look, Geno's a friend of mine. I understand what he's asked of you to do, and here's what we would like for you to do. And talk to him in the same tone that I had been talking to them, so that it didn't go bad. And we had complete cooperation.
Yeah. So let's go back to some training stuff. What do you think, or maybe there's more than one, what do you think's the core, I don't know, philosophy or training that you got out of the negotiation side of it? What was some things, was it active listening, or what was something that you felt like this is kind of what I think is kind of the key of being a good communicator?
Yeah. As it relates to the negotiator or any law enforcement officer, I think you mentioned my book. When I first wrote that book, I wanted to be a little instruction guide for law enforcement officers, whether corrections or police, whatever they were. And to get them to understand that it was a communications process, verbally and emotionally. There's remember we say there are nonverbal communication skills, and then there's the verbals. And so why do people barricade? I came up with the 4 R's. Do you remember that?
Yep.
I gave you a test on that if you like.
Oh, yeah.
So, and let me just say this about those 4 R's. I thought about it, and Kurt Frizz and I were flying in the helicopter one day, and we always talked tactical stuff. We didn't talk about flying. We talked about what we did out there tactically.
Yeah.
And I came up and I go, Kurt, it's all about the 4 R's. He goes, what do you mean? I go, it's about barriers that people put up. You recognize, respect, reduce, and remove them. But the only way you can do that is through a communications process. There are 2 types of barriers that people put up, physical and emotional. We have to learn how to first reduce the emotional barriers in order to gain trust and rapport. The only way to do that is through communications. And you mentioned the active listening skills. And in order to do that, you have to use your active listening skills. Right. And they use these in sales. They use them in psychology, open-ended questions and all those other things that come along with it. And so I started training people to use them, if you recall, in a specific order as you get started.
Right.
And how you can gauge your process to systematically reduce and remove those. You have to remove the emotional barriers before you start removing the physical barriers in order to give them to surrender and everybody's safe.
And it's important you talk about the barriers because, again, unfortunately, watching some of these videos, you see as soon as that front door gets closed on them or the bedroom door gets closed, most cops' immediate reaction is to kick the door in, right? Instead of just like stopping and not right. And it's something I teach just because I got it from you, is about how important is it to recognize those barriers? You know, that door, that car door, that's a barrier, and you haven't earned the right to just kick that barrier down.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think that's where we just, again, make those mistakes of not knowing and then not learning, like, how do you actually reduce those barriers?
Yeah. And that's true. And so when you look at the emotional barriers that people put up, they're put in place first. That's
Right.
why they don't want to talk to you.
Right.
They don't want to say anything. They have private information. But a lot of people want to start with these direct, hard questions about what's going on in their life. That'd be like me asking you about issues with your wife,
Right.
medical things. These are all barriers that people they put up in their minds. Maybe even a lack of eye contact.
Right.
If you're face to face, but definitely on the phone where they refuse to talk. I said, so you don't ever give up when somebody's not want to talk to you, but you have to subtly start trying to reassure them. And once they start talking, hey, look, they're talking now. You've reduced a little bit of that emotional barrier. They're agreeable to at least have some communications process.
Right.
And then you start going through the active listening skills to see how much information you get. So you respect the emotional barriers, you respect their privacy, all the private things that are going on in their life, and you start to reduce those and remove them. You build a better communications process with the trust and rapport. And then you start trying to work on removing the physical barriers. And that's where you train your other officers, that are on containment or who are the rest teams, how to respect the physical barriers and how important it is for them to maintain their physical barriers, because that's what everybody has barriers. This is barriers about not only the individual in crisis, but law enforcement.
Right.
And we have our own barriers, and it's all about safety and survival.
And the other important key to that is just the concept of time. Like,
Yeah.
Of course, we know, like, this doesn't happen quickly, right? To get through all those
Exactly.
barriers, it takes time. And I think you can appreciate more than most because you have that tactical thing. And we know, like, a lot of times the tactical guys, they don't understand. They don't want to take that time, right? So how hard is it to realize, like, hey, this does take time. It's not going to be that 15, 30 minutes. Hey, we're checking that checkbox kind of a thing, right? We
Right.
actually have to take the time to work the process if that's kind of where we're going and what we're talking about.
I tried to explain to my tactical friends, when we were out there, that, look, we got this suicidal person armed. It's going to take me, it's going to be about 4-hour ordeal. You could count on it most all the time. Sometimes you get lucky,
Right.
and get them out of there much quicker. But about 4 hours, I said, it's going to take me 4 hours to get this person to say, yeah, I want to come out. But it's going to take me another 2 hours to get them to get over the embarrassment of the situation that they created and save face. So you have to understand, once they say that, I'm going to let you know what the progress is.
Right.
But now I got to get them past that other barrier of the new issue they created in their life. And that's tough. That is harder than the first 2 hours.
Oh, yeah.
As you well know.
Yeah.
But you got to get these guys to sit back and relax, stay on their game, because it may change.
Yeah. And it's important you brought up that, because I think towards the end, that's the last thing that these people have is that dignity and respect and that safe phasing kind of thing, that face saving kind of a thing. And that's so important because, again, as these are winding down, realizing that, and maybe it might be something to where, hey, don't handcuff me in front of my kids. Hey, can I get a jacket to get thrown over me? Something to that effect.
Sure.
And not understanding that could be a big, well, we're not going to do that person. Whereas, well, why not? What's going to harm it if we can get this resolved, right?
Exactly.
So I think this is a good place for us. Just go ahead and take a break. So we're going to take a break here, and we'll be right back to the Crisis Cop podcast.
Thought about a career in voiceover? Need a great, cost-effective on-hold message for your organization or business? Don't know where to start? Check out The Voice Farm, your one-stop shop for voiceover needs. Check it out now by accessing The Voice Farm at voicefarmers.com and see what difference can be made with a company that is truly outside the box. From the Voice Box. voicefarmers.com. That's voicefarmers.com.
Wouldn't it be cool if your advertising could last forever? It can with perpetual advertising. Here's how it works. Unlike TV or radio ads, where every instance the ads are broadcast, they're only played once and lost forever. Perpetual advertising can have repeat exposure and replayability weeks, months, and even years after they're inserted in a podcast. So even if a podcast is a few years old, your ads will still be impactful to repeat listeners, as well as new listeners. This gives your advertising dollar the most bang for the buck. Find out more about perpetual advertising at twoguystalking.com/sponsors.
Have you got a cool voice? Do you like to act? Are you quick when it comes to thinking on your feet? Want to help propel the future of training crisis negotiators across the globe and foster the future of law enforcement? We need you. It doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter what's on your plate. We want your voice to help us evolve the way that law enforcement interacts and succeeds when it comes to crisis negotiation. Ready to get started? Access bluebaggersproject.com and start your role-playing voice adventure today. bluebaggersproject.com. That's bluebaggersproject.com.
Welcome back to the Crisis Cop Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Doering, and joining us today in studio is a personal friend, mentor of mine, retired sergeant, correct? Was sergeant? Lieutenant?
No, just patrol.
Patrol
Officer.
officer. I gave him a promotion. He deserved it. So we'll go back and figure that out. Geno Dorough. So, Geno, let's just go back and we're kind of talking about training, going through that stuff, but let's talk about any particular. I know you probably had, you said 300 something incidents, but was there any one or two that really stuck out for whatever reason that may be?
Wow. Pat, I have a lot, and some of them I forget. The one that first comes to my mind is a incident that occurred in front of St. Anthony's Hospital in St. Louis 2 days before Christmas, about 5:00 in the evening, where this young man had taken his girlfriend or wife, I can't recall exactly, hostage. And he had a lot of mental issues, and they were in a car, but before our arrival, he had let her go. So when I had gotten there, he was standing outside of his vehicle near the trunk of the vehicle, and it was raining, and the media was there, and he had a 12-gauge shotgun up and under his chin, and wanting to commit suicide. Unfortunately, for me and for him, he did end up pulling the trigger. But it was a very volatile situation. He was standing at the back of the trunk, and I was standing at the rear quarter panel, so maybe about 4 feet away from him. I really never thought that he was going to try to harm me, which he never did. But it went on for a few hours, and I got him to that stage where he thought he did not want to do it, but he realized, like I talked about, the embarrassment stage. The poor guy had realized that now what he's created is far worse, because he'd already been undergoing mental evaluation and even some shock treatments for his mental issues. And he would say, "I'm going to do it, Geno, now." And I go, "Just look in my eyes, just look at me and let's keep talking." And finally, and he goes, "Okay." And he just kind of stared right at me and spread his legs out and pulled the trigger, which was a tough one to handle, for us and negotiators when you lose somebody like that. That one stuck in my mind. I have several others, but we'd have to pick a topic of something that we may want to learn a lesson from.
Yeah. So let's go back to that one. So obviously not a great incident. So what kind of, back in the day, was there anything department wise, or was it just like, okay, moving on, let's go to the next call? And then what did you have for coping mechanisms, or how did you cope with, when we lose someone or bad incidents like that? What was something that helped
Sure.
you? Or
You know, unfortunately, again, back in these days,
right, yeah,
we really didn't have any kind of psychological help.
yeah,
So I can tell you that, let's see, that individual took his life, and then there were two others that took their lives. Uh, not over the embarrassment, but it was two of them were due to the decision to take a tactical
mhm,
stance and take an action
mhm,
that then precipitated a reaction,
right,
and where the individual instantly took their life. So I really never thought that stuff really bothered me a lot. I didn't talk about it much at home.
mhm,
After that guy took his face off with that 12 gauge shotgun, I went home and oh, how was work? I go, "Ah, nothing really, guy killed himself here, in front of
right,
me." And I just moved on. But I was doing some training for Missouri State Highway Patrol at their academy in Jeff City
mhm,
for their negotiators. And we came to a section, I was going to do a 4-hour section of training on just suicide. And I didn't use a PowerPoint or anything. I just would talk about it.
mhm,
And I'm sitting in this theater room with all these state troopers in their uniforms and talking about suicide. And I had some friends of mine kill themselves.
mhm,
There were 3 of them. And my sister had attempted suicide a couple times, plus the ones I witnessed. And so as I was talking to these officers, I started crying, tearing up. And, it was hard to control and kind of got their attention. I was embarrassed by it,
mhm,
but we got through it. And then that night we were doing role play, and so a few of the guys were around, and I go, "Guys, I'm sorry for losing it there." And
yeah,
they go, "Oh, Geno, you had us." But I realized then that I had some form of uh, PTSD, I
mhm,
suppose you could call it that,
yeah,
And I ended up calling a guy, Bill Hogwood.
yeah,
You remember his name?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He was out of Baltimore County or Baltimore, I believe, and then moved.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what county? Prince
Prince
George
George, yeah, yeah,
County. And so I met Bill. I went up to Detroit, Ann Arbor, to take his course
mhm,
in 1 year, and I took it, and then the following year I was teaching it. But he and I hit it off really well, and he wanted to retire, and asked if I want to do his stuff. I go, yeah.
mhm,
So anyway, after this incident occurred at the Highway Patrol, I called Bill. I go, Bill, this is what happened. And he
mhm,
goes, yeah, Geno. He goes, this is probably what you were experiencing. Now, Bill had a lot of experience
yeah,
uh, in negotiations,
mhm,
but we learned a lot from each other, which we can as negotiators. We all have different techniques, different ways of
right,
doing things, and you sit around and talk, and you can learn a lot, even if you're a veteran.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think one of the biggest things is having that team around you too, and as a team, talk about these incidents. I think that really helps. I go back to I was watching a podcast. It was a Navy SEAL talking about how messed up he was, and he would go ask his buddies, "Hey, did that mess you up?" And they'd all be like, "Oh, no, 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 we're good, we're good, we're good."
yeah, the
And then
macho.
yeah, and then 10 years later, when they all realize it did mess them up, and he goes, "Why didn't we ever say that? Why didn't we just honest with each other and say, hey, you know what, that did mess us up. We're all human." I think that's huge to know, like, hey, we're all going through the same thing. We're all human. That's something to do, and I think it's good. I think we're doing a better job of talking about this and
Mhm.
realizing that. Still not where we need to be, but way better than definitely when you started. Even when I started, I think we're making steps there too.
Yeah, and actually, I had an incident. It was commander. I won't mention his name, and I don't hold it against him, but we had these incidents that occurred that people took their lives because of a tactical issue. And then we were on a call out with a guy that was barricaded, and the U.S. Marshals were going to try and effect an arrest, and he barricaded. He ended up killing himself. I didn't ever even talk to the gentleman. And I had a new commander, and he, for whatever reason, goes, "Oh, yeah, Geno Kevorkian." And I go, "I didn't have anything to do with
Yeah.
this or these other guys killing themselves." And I just look, I go, how can you say that? Not just because it's me. I would never think about saying that to an officer who was trying to do his or her very best to help save somebody's life, because it's what we do.
Yeah.
We don't get any credit for it. That's fine too. I never got any medals for negotiating. Yeah, but we sure keep a lot of guys from having to go through that door and risk their life.
Right.
And we've heard of officers getting shot and killed on entries.
Right.
Barricaded.
Yeah, and that was one of the biggest things, I think, getting tactical guys to realize, like, how much better is it for you to have them come out to you than you have to go in and get them. I think when you start really figuring that out, like, oh, that makes a lot more sense, right? But sometimes we don't always think about that, right?
Yeah. Well, when I left the tactical unit, this brings back a memory. When I left the tactical unit, I had a young officer in there. He's still a captain on the county police department, but he was young in the tactical unit. He goes, Geno, I can't believe you're leaving. I was like, I got so much more to learn from you. I go, you know what, Jim? I said, you're going to be fine. I said, but just remember one thing, this weaponry you have and all these tools that we need, you're a better team if you don't deploy those.
Right.
And you work through the process of communicating and getting it done, because whether you guys believe it or not, you are a part of the communications process. Okay. You're the actual nonverbal part of the communications. The negotiator has their verbal and nonverbal, but the tactical team, they have a nonverbal communication, and that message they send needs to be congruent with what the negotiator is sending. Don't ever forget these things.
Right. And there's no better point of that when you look at Waco, how disconnected tactical was with negotiations. And then it just turned out into a disaster because they weren't on the same playing field, right? They weren't basically portraying like negotiators, we're here to help. And tactical's doing, destroying things and everything. So it's totally disconnect there. So,
yeah. And you know what? That is because of a lack of a agreed upon philosophy, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm proud to say my good friend, I call him my little brother, Kurt Frizz, the chief in St. Charles County, he's maintained that philosophy and helped to project that on his department and all through the different positions he held in St. Louis County, because it's not a philosophy that's new. It's just whether you choose to pursue it and maintain it. But that's hard to maintain.
Yeah.
As officers come and go, others have other different philosophies. They don't have the background, the knowledge, the training to understand that they need to keep it going.
Right. So talked about a little bit about lessons. I think one of the biggest lessons I ever learned from you was just the fact of, okay, so that person's in there barricaded. Why should we really care? And then you always be like, well, that's somebody's brother, somebody's mother, somebody's sister. So they have people that care for them. And then what if that was your brother, mother, sister?
Exactly.
Would you do the same things? I think sometimes when you throw that at them, that really gets people to think, maybe we should slow this down. Maybe we should actually think about what we're doing, because our actions do have consequences.
They do.
I think that was a huge lesson. And I always try to make sure everybody was aware of that. Like, there's always someone there that could have been someone from your family. So always throw that in there.
I always said, no matter what that person has done, we're not here to judge them. We're here to help preserve their life and the officers that are on the scene. We're not judge and jury. We don't have that right.
Right.
Somebody loves them no matter what they've done.
So let's go back to, is there any incident where you learned like a valuable lesson that maybe you could pass along to some negotiators, or something that kind of sticks out to, like, this was I remember this one and this one?
Well, I can give you a lesson that I learned personally by my actions. We had a barricaded subject in Chesterfield, and in fact, a couple guys got Medal of Valors out of it because of something I did that was stupid, and I admit it. I was negotiating with this gentleman, and I had somewhere I needed to be, a personal appointment. It was with a committee for a high school reunion. It wasn't anything huge, but I really wanted to go.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm like, you know, I want to get out of here. I'm going to be late.
Yeah.
You know? So my lieutenant goes, what do you think? And I go, look, he's not coming out. He's not do blah, blah, blah. And you have to go in and get him. Well, they did, but it risked my friends' lives because the guy was armed. They had to do, an open air option and go hands on physically when he stepped outside the door, and he had the weapons on him, and they could have been seriously injured or killed. Then after that, I thought about it, I go, I can never do this again. But I did it. And I'm, embarrassed to say it, but I want that message to be sent that no, you can't let your personal things get in the way. You have to take the time, spend the time. Time is extremely important in diffusing these aggressive situations.
Yeah, and we like to say is we call it big boy, big girl stuff. Like this is serious stuff, and you have to be committed to it. You can't be that T-shirt wearer. I just want to get the T-shirt and really not do anything, right?
Exactly.
If you signed up for this job, no matter what you have on the, hey, I was supposed to take my my biggest memory I remember is I have 3 girls and a boy, but my boy wasn't born yet. But my 3 girls were at the movie theater. We had just sat down to the movie theater, opening credits, and then what happens? I get the call, right? I got to go. So I'm like looking at my kids, and they can just see, what do you mean we're leaving? The movie's not even started yet, Dad. I'm like, I get it, but unfortunately, there's somebody that decided he's barricaded, and I have to go talk to him now. So that was one of those things where like you don't realize how much it affects, and then until it affects, but if you're committed and you got to do it, you got to do it. So,
well, I was sitting at home one night. I recall this like yesterday, and I had a suit on. My wife was all dressed up. We were going out for our anniversary, nice dinner, and pager went off. I called my sergeant. He goes, hey, we got a barricaded situation down in South County. It's a firefighter. I go, you got to be kidding me, Tom. I said, I'm getting ready to go out to dinner with my wife. He goes, yeah, I get it, Geno. I go, okay, I'll be there. So I go to my wife and I say, hey, I got some good news, bad news and good news. The bad news is I just got called out for an armed barricaded situation. The good news is you're going with me. She goes, what? I go, get in the car. So I drove my personal car down there, and she was like, this big ordeal.
Yeah.
She never knew what we did, you know?
Yeah.
And I said, look, I looked at it, I go, look, I'll have him out of there in 10 minutes. So I told my buddy, he goes, what are you doing? My sergeant. I go, hey, I told you we were going to dinner. I brought her along because I'm going to dinner from here.
Yeah.
He goes, what do you think? I go, okay, let me talk to this guy. And it worked out well. I mean, it really literally took me 10 minutes to get this firefighter out of there, but we had a good rapport and it worked out well. But you go.
Yeah.
You got to go.
Yeah.
Sometimes the family and the wives don't like it.
Right.
What are you going to do? Say no when you got somebody that's, in danger of taking their life or hurting somebody else? No, you can't do that.
It never fails. These things usually don't happen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Not convenient.
Right? No,
never convenient.
Usually midnight, 11 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning. That's usually when these things pop off. And again, like you said, you got to go. So that's what you signed up for. That's what you got to do, right?
Yeah.
So kind of speaking on the terms, did you ever get to a point where you felt like the burnout? You just got to a point where, man, I'm constantly going on these calls. I'm constantly dealing with these other people's problems. I got my own problems to deal with. Now I got these other people's problems I'm dealing with too. Did you ever get that burnout?
Well, Pat, I never got burned out on it. I don't want to say that I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it certainly wasn't a high because it's very emotionally draining, as you well know.
Yeah.
You spend 3, 4, 5. I mean, my longest one was 14 hours.
Yeah.
You spend that kind of time talking to somebody, trying to get them to comply and modify their behavior so that nobody gets hurt. It's exhausting.
Oh yeah.
And then sometimes it's really not appreciated, but somebody will tell you, hey, nice job. And you go, hey, I'm just tired. I'm going to go home.
Yeah.
I never did get burned out on it.
I think it's one of those things that where, like you said, I remember ran a marathon, but it feels like you ran a marathon because you're just so, because you put everything into it. You're so focused on getting that compliant surrender that you're just focused. And then when it's over, you still get that little bit of a high until then all of a sudden that high just goes straight down into the roller coaster and you're down in the bottom. And
One thing that strikes me though, that sometimes it gets a little bit hard to deal with. I'm thinking that a lot of negotiators might not understand this, but not only are you negotiating and communicating with the suspect, okay, that's in crisis,
right.
but you're also negotiating and communicating with your supervisor, everybody else
Right.
who wants to go in a different route that in your mind, in your opinion, is perhaps not the right way to go.
Right.
We all have an opinion, but then the officers are involved in it. They're also in a state of crisis. And I worked with a guy who was a supervisor of mine that I had to watch him because I could tell when he was getting his crisis level was elevating.
Mhm.
Maybe the way he was talking, his nostrils would
Yeah.
flare. He'd breathe harder, and I'd go, oh boy, I got to control him too, and not only this guy.
Right.
Okay, it's very exhausting.
Yeah, some of the biggest negotiations I think I actually had too were communicating with command of
Yeah.
like, hey, this is what we need, and you could see I'm okay dealing with the barricaded person. I got to deal with command to get them their levels under
In
control.
the tactical
and then-
teams.
Yeah,
And I'm pretty sure you were there. I did training for St. Charles County
Mhm.
years ago,
Mhm.
and you were involved in it. But I said, I'll do this training, but I want the tactical team to come out.
Mhm.
I'm not going to charge you for that, but I want them to come out and work the scenarios and sit in the class
Yeah.
with the negotiators on what we're learning
Yeah.
and doing, just to help them be on the same page.
right. Yeah. So let's take a little different path. So was there any call out, maybe looking back that maybe I don't want to say like comical, but you just kind of look back like that was actually kind of something different, something amusing that we didn't necessarily think would happen or something to that effect.
I used to, I had this thing when I was negotiating to use a line from a movie.
Okay.
Okay, on this subject. Yeah, I'll get to that one in a minute. But I remember talking to a young man down in South County. He was barricaded in his garage, and
Mhm.
and it's face to face,
Yeah.
and it's during the afternoon, and he's in the garage, and I'm looking at him and talking, and he starts throwing things at me, hammers and whatnot, and I'm ducking out of the way, and then he's calling me all kinds of names.
Yeah.
I finally just looked, I go, hey man, my wife calls me worse than
Yeah.
that. And then yeah, I used to use these lines from movies, so I won't mention the name of this individual that was barricaded. It was a domestic thing, and his father was very well known.
Mhm.
And so he was barricaded because he had flourished a weapon at another woman when he was looking for his significant other. He left there and didn't do anything,
Hmm.
and then barricaded himself in an apartment. It was on New Year's. No, it was night before Super Bowl.
Okay.
And father had been a professional football player. So anyway, I'm negotiating with him, and he had a very good background in psychology. And I would do things as negotiators,
Mhm.
and he would, yeah, I know what you're doing, Geno. You're doing this. You're doing. I mean,
Yeah.
man, this guy is. He knows what's happening.
Yeah.
So it got to a point. I told him, I go, look, the tactical team is out here, and they want to come in and get you. Okay, I'm trying to avoid that because you're going through a lot of things in your life.
Mhm.
He goes, you send them in. He was armed
Mhm.
with a handgun. And I go, okay, man, they're coming in and hell's coming with them. So that was about the only one
How'd that work out for him?
Oh, you know what I ended up doing, because he was so very knowledgeable about
Uh-huh.
psychology and communications, that I decided to try something different with him. And instead of being the nice guy, I went off on him,
Mm.
called him names, yelled at him over the phone, all this stuff. And then I just hung up on him. And when I did that, my supervisor, my lieutenant, looked at me and goes, well, that's different. What are you going to do now? And I go, I'm going to give him a few minutes. I'm going to call him back.
Mhm.
He goes, how are you going to recover from that? I go, just bear with me. So I called him back and I go, hey, look, first thing I want to say before we get started is I want to apologize to you for the way I behaved and what I said. They never expect you're going to apologize.
Yeah.
But, it was uncalled for. And I just got my ass jumped by my supervisor. I said, but what I'd like to let you know is I'm not any different than you. With your girlfriend, all you're looking for is some cooperation and communication to help resolve the issues you had.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but when you don't get anybody participating in that process, you get aggravated and frustrated,
Right.
and you go to aggressive behavior. I go, I'm a little bit frustrated because you don't want to communicate and try to work this out. I said, so I'm not any different. But I do know one thing. How about we start over? 15 minutes later, I hit him out. It was funny at the time, but on both sides, using line on him and then looking at my supervisor when I acted out of character for a negotiator.
Yeah.
And he was a little confused on why we would do that, but it worked.
So if there was maybe one or two things that you could kind of give somebody that's thinking about wanting to be a negotiator or somebody who's actually a negotiator now, what's some tips that you would maybe give them that you kind of learned throughout your career?
Well, I would tell them to reflect back on the early years in law enforcement when they were out on the street handling calls for service and how they behaved. But it really boils down to is how would you, if you were in these situations that they're in, how would you want somebody to talk to you? If this was a family member of yours, as you mentioned that earlier, how would you treat them? How would you want them to be treated by law enforcement? I said, if you can stay within those, the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, be respectful to people, be willing to listen and not preach to them or override them with how much knowledge you have, but really being willing to listen to the issues that they're going through and try to relate on some level of understanding, but never tell them that I understand exactly how you feel. Because they got one response, no, you don't. You're not in my shoes. No, but I have a general idea how you feel based on what you've told me. Pat, you've gone through a lot in your life, and I'm just trying to find out ways to help you rebuild that.
So you talked about kind of before you even retired, you got into the teaching thing. So what's something that really helped you become a better instructor or something that you've learned going through the teaching phase, all that stuff?
I think what really helped me in that way is my desire really to put out for information to other officers just to help them along, to not reinvent the wheel. I had a lot of struggles, throughout my career, but I always tried to be a nice guy when I dealt with people. And I try to avoid arresting anybody if I could. You can't, but if you got to evaluate the situation and say, how do I want to treat this person? Do I want to invest the time and energy because they seem like a nice person? But then again, I knew that I was projecting an image for our department, which I enjoyed it being a professional department like you did yours. And they may only come in contact with me as a St. Louis County police officer. And I don't want them walking away thinking this is what all police officers act like on the negative sense. And I used to tell guys down at the courthouse that worked there that they thought they were better. They shouldn't be down in working security at the courthouse. And I had to remind them, I go, look, you're down here in this courthouse and you have more contact with the public than any police officer does out on the street on a daily basis. And you have people coming into this courthouse, St. Louis County, from all over the county, all over the state, all over the country. Mm-hmm. And the way you behave and what you projected them is what they think of St. Louis County Police Department.
Right.
You can't behave this way. I like where I am, where I work, and the image that we project. You should think about that. And that's what a negotiator does too.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think we're one of the only professions to where one bad apple, unfortunately, it taints the whole everybody. Now everybody, you have that one bad interaction with one police officer, and then for some reason that sticks, right? So I think we had to do a way better job of realizing, like, hey, your actions affect the whole profession. And I think hopefully more people realize that, and it helps, get that public back on our side, get them trusting law enforcement, and kind of down that angle.
Well, I'm sure, Pat, that in all your years in law enforcement and negotiating, that it came up on more than one occasion how this individual was treated by other officers. And you then that became a barrier.
Yeah.
And you had to overcome that barrier.
Right.
And you might be backing up and saying, hey, look, I can't account and for what other guys or women have done, officers, but I'm trying to assure you that it isn't happening here. We're going to treat you, with respect. And, I'm going to be one-on-one. I'm going to try to be a nice guy with you, but you had to overcome that. And see, those barriers that are put up, they're not just put up by the individuals in a crisis, but there's barriers put up by the officers that confronted them or dealt with them in the past.
Yeah.
And that's a barrier for you to overcome. Now you got to think about, how am I going to overcome that barrier?
Right.
This is a game of reducing and removing all these barriers that are put in place in order to gain compliance and get behavior modification.
Yeah, that's one of the toughest things when these people tell you about their interactions with police and it's all been bad. It's like now you're basically, okay, now I have to go through 20 years of bad interactions and try and fix that, right? So that's that huge barrier to overcome.
Well, I negotiated a jail riot back in 93. And while I was in the negotiations, an officer came in, commanding officer, and made some comments that we weren't going to do what I had promised these inmates was going to happen. They heard it because I couldn't mute we didn't even have a crisis throw phone you could mute back in those days. Well, I had overcome that.
Yeah.
I said, hey, look, he goes, I just heard what that guy said. I go, look, the guy's an asshole. He's from such and such department, and don't pay any attention to him.
Yeah.
So you can either believe me or not.
Right.
Tell me what you want to do.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things we always talk about is legacies, like legacy. What would you want your legacy to be, or what do you think your legacy was in the crisis negotiation community?
Well, you never know for sure. I would, during those times, only hoped and wished that somebody would say, hey, Geno was a good mentor and he taught me a lot, and to know that, say you, for example, that you are becoming a mentor and have been a mentor and passing on all this knowledge and things that not only you and I have built, but negotiators all around the country and even perhaps around the world, because this is all information. We didn't invent all this.
Right.
Okay. We didn't write the book on it. Now we were fortunate to put our thoughts down in a book so people can read it and I can pass it on in other ways. But that's all I ever wanted, was to be happy to sit here with you and know that I had an effect. And now you're having an effect. To me, that's the best reward.
Yeah, 100%. So you did speak of books, so I did actually bring the first book I ever got in negotiations. It's hot off the press, Compliant Surrender.
Did I ever explain this cover to you?
I don't know if you, I think maybe at one point you might have, but
okay.
Go ahead and explain it again though.
Well, on the cover of this book is, you have a door here that's a barrier.
Right.
Okay. And these tactical officers, this cover represents a communications process, verbal and nonverbal. And this door represents barriers, all the different kinds of barriers that people put up. Our goal is compliant surrender. This officer here at the top, the negotiator, is speaking with verbal and nonverbal communication. These officers here are strictly nonverbal. But the message that this officer sends and these officers send to the individual that's in a crisis needs to be congruent in order to effectively reduce, remove the physical barriers that people put down and gain compliance. And the only way you can gain compliance is through behavior modification. Once you get behavior modification and you build the trust and rapport, this door can be opened. And these officers then can take up where this officer left off with verbal skills, giving them directions on what to do in a respectful manner, not screaming and yelling.
Right.
And that's why I designed my book cover.
Yeah.
This
And
way.
it's still available on Amazon, correct?
Well, I've seen it on one book on Amazon.
So
Somebody was charging some ridiculous price.
We'll try and find a good spot where if they wanted to get a hold of it, we'll get. So then this is actually my newest book. This one's my thing. So this one I'm actually going to give to you.
Oh, well,
which I
thank you.
actually
Did
wrote
you
a
sign
little-
it?
Yes, I did sign it.
Okay.
So just a little thank you for what you've done for me in my career. And I honestly, I don't think I'd be here without having to gone to that one class. Who knows? Maybe I would have went to a different class, but I think it was that one class that really sparked me into, well, this is something fascinating. And it was all about your passion. Like if you weren't passionate and you just taught the class, you probably just would have been another instructor. And man, that was a good class, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's something that I really, hey, if you do this job as negotiating, it's big boy, big girl stuff, but you had to be passionate about it. Like I said, you had to drink the Kool-Aid and continue to seek knowledge, because we're never going to know everything, right? And I think it's just important to always seek that knowledge, always keep that connection, and just keep going forward. I think that's the best way to continue what we're doing in the field of negotiations.
Yeah, and the passion is important. I mean, we've all said in training classes where it's kind of boring, mundane. You think and the person's reading right off their slide,
Right.
But if you have passion and you're not reading off your PowerPoint or on the slide or whatever, you have it out in front of you, but you're just talking to everybody like they're your best friend, all these officers out there, and you engage with them individually. That's where the connection comes in.
Right.
And I don't remember the exact day, but I feel pretty confident that when you were in my class, I probably walked right up to you, in front of the table or wherever you're sitting, and looked right in your eyes and talked about some things and then moved on to the next.
Yeah.
And I know you do the same thing because I think I taught you that.
Safe to say that's probably true. Right?
And I taught this to my son. He's a chiropractor. And I said, look, this is a communications process between you and the patients.
Right.
And, you have to be sincere, empathetic. And he uses all the stuff in my book that we learned in negotiations when he's dealing with his patients.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're in a crisis state.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, everything we do communication wise is so valuable just in everyday communication.
Yeah.
And it's so important to just educate everybody. And like you said, a lot of times we don't get the, hey, great job. It's just that we're just moving on, going to the next call. And you know what? That's good enough for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we do what we did.
And salespeople use this too. They just don't know exactly what they're doing. But at the end of their sales pitch, they get paid a lot of money.
Right. And we don't.
We don't.
That is. We sign up for it. So.
We get a little sense of accomplishment and moving on. Right. So therefore, your payback is you're a mentor to people. And these officers are going to come back and say, hey, man, thanks for just like you to me.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to say thanks, Geno, for coming out, spending some time. Tell us a little about yourself. Being the first in-studio guest, I thought, why not bring my mentor in studio? And
well, thank you, Pat.
Something special. And I just want to thank all the listeners of the Crisis Cop podcast. Make sure you subscribe, like, and check us out. Thank you.